Hello. In the last lesson, we talked about the liberalization of Indian economy and what does that term mean. We studied the impact of liberalization on Indian cinema and how it led to the rise of global market for Indian films, and because of that rise of global market, the role and impact of NRIs on Indian cinema. In today's lecture, we will deal with liberalization and its impact on Indian cinema in the form of film and narrative and storytelling structure. Also, we will talk about the rise of multiplex culture and its impact, and the consequent fall of single screen theatres because of multiplex culture. So, we will start with the impact on production. So, basically after liberalization, the audience base increased. Why? Because Indian films were consumed by a wider and diverse audience. Like in India there was an audience already, but now because of liberalization they had audiences in UK, in countries like Canada, America. So there was an increased presence, and that audience was also more pocket heavy, so they could invest and they would put more money, and that too in terms of dollars and pounds, than an average Indian audience would. So the filmmakers had to keep them in mind. Also, because of television, the globalization and liberalization that impacted India, the rise of television that we talked about in the last lecture, because of that audience now had variety. Need not go to a theatre to get entertained or a cinema hall to get entertained, they could also get entertained sitting in their own dining room using remote control and switching channels. So TV changed the way filmmakers thought of the audience. The monopoly of entertainment of films ended, and TV also started making inroads. So because of all these, consequently there were major changes in production values that were observed, because now the filmmakers have to invest a lot more in their films to make it bigger and better for such a diverse group of audience. So what production technologies that came were digital sound. So before that we had mechanical sound, but now digital sound, foreign locations. Before 1990s, if you look at films that were shot in India, they would, if they have to go for an exotic location, they would have gone to say Himachal, Kashmir. So these places, the song and dance routine used to happen in such places. But if you look at the 1990s pictures, you will find that the dance and song routines, the romantic locations and the foreign locations began to spurge. So you have shots of London, you have shots of New York, you have shots of beautiful Switzerland. So those dance, if you remember those songs of someone like Madhuri Dixit and Sri Devi dancing in a sari in a Switzerland, that those kinds of song routines come to mind when we talk about 1990 cinema. So that was because of the lavish production value that started to establish, because more money was now available for films, and that was used to cater to such audiences. So an NRI living in New York or London would have a more susceptible and more local flavor in the film that was shot also in London and New York. So to get that audience attracted to Indian cinema, so they changed the location. Then of course the bigger sets, the bigger budgets. So and that has continued till date. Slowly and slowly Indian cinema, as much as it gets globalized and as much as it's getting exposure globally, the sets are getting bigger, the budgets are getting bigger, and the profit is also subsequently getting higher. Why? And this, of course, the salary of production personnel. If you look at the numbers that were there before 1991 and after 1991, you will find that the budget increased as well as the salaries mushroomed. So film industry started paying their actors, their technicians more money just to keep them with them and avoid them to go into switching into television where they could get money. So to stop that brain drain from the film industry, they started paying their personnel more. Of course, marketing and promotion became essential for filmmaking business. That means that a film had to be marketed, you had to put money in marketing. No longer could a film be just taken for granted that because of such and such actor, people will go and see the film. Because it's an Amitabh Bachchan movie, because it's a Rajesh Khanna movie, so people will go and it will run for 6 months or no. The audience could not be taken for granted. So they had to market the film even if it was a big budget with a big movie star in it. Larger budget also meant that if the film failed, there were losses. There were bigger losses also. So now the experimentation also started to wane. So your parallel cinema, films like Mirch Masala died because they were average earning films. They would do well in certain urban theatres, and then but these type of average earning films, production ceased altogether. So a lot of films, average earning films, so now you had a big gap. So you had either a big budget film or a very sort of a B grade or a C grade film. So the mid level where the parallel cinema used to come during the 70s and the 80s, that died out. Then comes with liberalization also the internationalization of production distribution. Today if you look at the production scene of Indian cinema, you will find that companies like Fox, companies like Disney are actually making films in India for Indians, like Slumdog Millionaire, right? It was a Fox production which went on to win an Oscars. So that was because it was a international studio filming and shooting in India. So those kind of productions slowly they came into existence. So it was an internationalization. Before, say in Hindi cinema or Indian cinema in general, you had a producer who had money and he would produce a film. Now there were corporations which were producing film, and slowly the production module changed. So an international norm of production houses, studio houses came into existence. Now let's look at the narratives, how the narrative of film changed. So we'll start with the romance films. So changes in romance films. Romance took on a new form. Family entertainers. We talked about family entertainers in the last lecture also, how they were love stories with elaborate song and dance, and they used to showcase Indian culture and tradition. So this was a more conservative sort of family entertainment where love took a backseat for culture and tradition and family values. You had strict parents who were traditionalists. So all of this was there. Another thing that was there was depiction of class differences prevalent in earlier films, completely eliminated, meaning that the class difference, if you look at say 70s cinema, 60s cinema, 80s cinema, you will find that the main protagonist, the heroine, they are from different backgrounds, or if they are from the same background, they are from poverty, if they have economic hardships, those things. And there is always a class struggle. Someone is rich, someone is poor. The parents don't agree because there is a economic difference between them. But that actually vanished in the 1990s because there was a celebration of prosperity and there was focus on this Gordian wealth. So if you look at 1990s cinema, if you look at love stories of 1990s, and even till now, if you stretch out the hero and heroine are from a similar background and they are immensely wealthy. You will have Lamborghinis, you will have big expensive cars, expensive tropes, expensive sort of a showcase of wealth. You will be there, and the signs of poverty, economic hardships and struggle for survival, just for survival, that disappeared from the Indian film industry. So your working and lower middle class basically, which were the focus of earlier films. If you look at say films of early Govinda or Mithun Chakravarti films of 80s, you will find that they depict people from working class. They will be mechanics, they will be carpenters, they will be of a lower working strata, they will be clerks, they will be peons. But now suddenly they will, even Amitabh Bachchan, they will be coolie. But now people were from the rich business class, extremely wealthy characters. And if character or a person is present in such a film, then it's depicted as a source of a tension and a conflict. It's no longer celebrated. Now why did this happen? Why was this change of narrative? Because in a globalized world, the NRIs couldn't connect with a person who was poor, because they now live in a place where, and they used to idealize India. They had a nostalgic and a romantic feeling about it, that Indians are also as happy as they are. We want values, we give more importance to values than class conflict, because at the end of the day, Indian cinema was turning into an escapist cinema. where you don't want to see what you see in your real life, you want to get away from your real life. It became a sort of a something very similar to what an escape person wants to, an ostrich basically putting a head inside the sand to avoid getting beaten up. So that sort of an ostrich like affair started between the society and cinema. So and another thing that happened in these love stories was the disappearance of villain. So with the disappearance of the villain or a person who is a criminal, the depiction of a police or a judge disappeared. Now if you go back and look into the films of the 80s or the 70s for that example, you will find that if there was a hero, then there was an opposing force in the form of a villain who was generally a criminal or a hard guy, and the either police was in their pocket, or you have the role of a judge where judge would sentence the not the criminal but basically the hero to jail for some reasons or the other. Like you have films like Andha Kanoon, or so these kind of films where you had critique of the police system, you had the critique of a judge, how the judgment system works, how the court cases keep dragging on, like those kinds of films, and the depiction of a villain slowly and slowly disappeared, and especially from these romantic films which were there, like Amitabh Bachchan films, you will find those characters of police, judge. So, but these, though they were romance films also, but these things disappeared. Now the characters were from the wealthy upper class that were showcased, that we have talked about, but earlier in, if you look at 70s 80s cinema, you will find that all the wealthy upper class characters are depicted as villains. They will be suited booted and they will be exploiters, they will create problems for the lower middle class, which were generally depicted by the heroes or family of hero. Now that also disappeared. Now they were benevolent, they were fathers, they were no longer exploiters. Why? Because of the rise of the business class in India after liberalization, and because the NRIs were generally business people, so they didn't want themselves to be depicted in films like that. So they, because of that, those business kinds of needs, they changed. Now the conflict was external in earlier films, but now it was internalized, meaning before that there was conflict, it was conflict between two people, there was a hero, there was a villain, and there were conflict, or there were conflicts of ideas, of ideology, right? So there were always two people involved. Now slowly and slowly conflicts were becoming internalized. Now something like a film like Sajan, so you have the conflict is there, but it is internalized. Sanjay Dutt's character is having insecurities because of his bad leg. It's not that he and Salman Khan are actually in a fight. There is no conversation, there is no dialogue. Salman Khan doesn't know because it's all internalized. His conflict is with himself. It is not like the earlier 70s 80s where if there is a conflict between two brothers, say let's take the example of Diwar in 1974, where you have Amitabh Bachchan and Shashi Kapoor on one side, one is a cop, one becomes a criminal, they are all brothers, but there is a conflict between them, externalized conflict between them. Here you have a character whose conflict has become internalized. So that changed Indian cinema, characterization became more internalized. Similarly in Hum Saath Saath Hain Bhi, you have that same knack. Now characters struggle with conflict between duty towards family and individual desire came into being, meaning the characters had a conflict whether to be dutiful towards the family and individual. Now I told you that Indian cinema had turned conservative during the 1990s. The showcasing of rebellion, the showcasing of womanhood was curtailed. Patriarchy again became dominant form because patriarchy became associated with Indian values. So in your films like Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, instead of rebelling against their family, Madhuri Dixit and Salman Khan's character will rather marry the person their family wants to marry rather than profess their love for each other in front of other family members. So duty towards family became more important, which was not the case in the 80s and 70s, where the hero and the heroine would run away rather than be part of rather than being unhappy about it. So this was all done not because of the domestic audience, this was again done for the NRI audience, which valued Indian values and which had a romanticized view of it. So choosing family ties and responsibilities over love was portrayed as the right thing to do, and it was only by showcasing, say, family that the conflict was resolved when family became associated with it. So your films like Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, Hum Saath Saath Hain, Kal Ho Na Ho, all of these films which you can see here denote the same problems: internalized character struggles, love over family over love. All of these is done by and males dictating what a female should do. So let's look at the changes in the gangster genre of Indian films, a very popular genre. Now what happened earlier was the depiction was westernized. The villain's depiction or the gangster's depiction was westernized, sophisticated. If you look at, say, film like Amar Akbar Anthony or any of the films, you will find a very gentlemanly sort of a gangster, a gentleman gangster who's suited booted, who's westernized in his way of talking, in his way he communicates. So the famous Ajit dialogue, Mona darling and all that. So that sort of a gangster image was created throughout the 60s, 70s and till the 80s. But in 1990s, these things changed. In 1990s globalized world, westernized and sophistication no longer was exploitative. It became part of Indian culture. It became the thing that Indian audiences wanted to aspire for. So something that the audience wants to aspire for cannot be made a gangster. So the gangster now became grittier, more realistic and depiction of the underworld. So if you see films of 1990 depicting underworld, you will find not suited booted gangsters but more grittier version of them. They would use slang, street dialects, khalas, those kind of dialogues became part of the gangster genre. Now it also gave rise to something called Bombay Noir. Now Bombay Noir is sort of an offshoot of film noir, that movement, that genre that we talked about in the earlier lessons. So it is a sort of a Bombay Noir where Bombay as a city becomes a place and the protagonist life in a Bombay noiristic crime world comes into being. So what used to happen, now even the journey arc or the character arc also changed in a gangster film. In earlier films, the protagonist, if the hero was actually becoming a villain, say in Diwar of 1974, Amitabh Bachchan becomes a gangster, a westernized gangster. It was due to circumstances. If you remember, Amitabh Bachchan acted Agnipath. He becomes a gangster because his father is unjustly hanged or killed by the villain, and he becomes a gangster as a revenge plot for that. So in earlier films, the protagonist, if the hero had to join the crime, it was because of dire circumstances. There was a push, that there were social conditions due to which the protagonist became a crime. Even if you go further back, like a film like in 1950s like Mother India, where Sunil Dutt's character becomes a dacoit because of the circumstance, because of the exploitation by an upper class person, a wealthier person, a money lender. So all of those sort of crime and depiction of villainy were because of dire circumstances. But after globalization, it changed. Why? Because of liberalization bringing global products and global outlook to normal Indians, the character started joining not because of some dire circumstances, because he or she wanted to live a life of luxury and excess. So a consumeristic lifestyle became prominent. A consumeristic lifestyle where being rich and being able to afford luxurious stuff became more important than the moral compass. So the money became more important, consumeristic lifestyle became more important. Something like, if you have to have a phone, it's better to have an Apple rather than a Nokia. Those sorts of mindset became ingrained in Indian cinema, and underworld became a legitimate profession. So if you look at films like Satya, Vastav, Company or Shootout at Lokhandwala, so these became more of luxurious depiction of gangsters. Now if you look at Satya or Company, these two are must watch films. Satya depicts the grittiness of the Bombay Noir. Satya is a quintessential Bombay Noir. So if you want to know what Bombay Noir is, just look at Satya and you will get to know what is Bombay Noir. Company is another Bombay Noir film based, came out in the early 2000s, Satya came in late 1990s, and it depicts the basically the gangster lifestyle and the luxury what I am talking about you will find in this. Let's look at how nationalism narrative stories changed in Indian cinema because of globalization. So earlier films were basically stereotypical of the West, that the West is immoral, individualistic and materialistic. So if you look at Manoj Kumar's Purab or Paschim, so you will find that image of West as a deeply immoral person, and the East or India is the best place. And the villains, if they were portrayed in nationalistic films, they were either Westerners or Westernized Indians. Just look at say Mr. India or Amitabh Bachchan's Mard. So those kind of, so either they were Westerners or Westernized Indians that were portrayed as villains. Now this all changed in the 1990s, and the discourse changed dramatically because the globalization culture, there was no the Westerners could no longer be considered villain, because they were part of the basic audience of Indian films. So if a Westerner wants to watch an Indian film, he or she would not like to be called a villain or be associated as a villain. So the narrative changed and Westerners were replaced by terrorists as the main villain in national cinema. Now nationalism cinema, so the East and West conflict, that was always part of Indian cinema. Being a colony, India always had a deep resentment of the Western way of life because it was imposed on Indian society. So there was a deep scar about it. And of course the partition of India is blamed generally on the Britishers or the West. Because of them they created divisions which led to partition. So there was always a cause of tension between East and West, and that's why globalization came so late in India, because of the government also holding itself back from opening up to the Westerners. So but in the 1990s, when India was forced to become a part of the globalized community, this conflict of East and West had to disappear, and it did. Then films from the late 80s and more so in the early part of 90s and throughout the 90s even later became associated with the central theme of terrorism when it came to nationalism. So the nation was always under siege and the saviors were the military, paramilitary and the police. Now if you remember, watch a film from the 1980s called Shahenshah by Amitabh Bachchan, where you will find Amitabh Bachchan playing a person, a policeman who is corrupt. He takes money during the day from the criminals, and then also his alter ego in the form of Shahenshah destroys criminal dens and hideouts and their networks in the night. But the policeman was portrayed as a criminal. Now look at it from a juxtaposition in the just 10 years later in the 1998-99 film Sarfarosh, where Amir Khan is playing an ACP, a police person who is trying to fight terrorists, and he is a very honest person, and look at the portrayal of all the policemen around him who are very honest. So there is a huge big gap in juxtaposition that is happening here. If you look at Anurag Kashyap's Black Friday, you will also find that there is a terrorist and there are policemen who are trying to hunt these terrorists, and the policemen are not corrupt, they are nationalistic and they are saviors. And then you have Anil Kapoor's Andaz, where paramilitary, military, they are becoming savior. Mehuna, Shah Rukh Khan's Mehuna. So where the nation is under siege by terrorists and the military and the paramilitary and the police men are basically the saviors and the guardians of the nation. Then another important point that happened was the direct use of a name of a particular country. Now this is very important point. What used to happen earlier was that even if there is a censor board, there is a guideline, there is a particular guideline in the film censor board that a film cannot have a negative depiction of a friendly country. Because of this guideline, no cinema before J.P. Datta's Border 1997 named a particular country, even when they were making say a hyper nationalist film like Hakikat, which was against on Indo-China war, or any of the Devanand's India-Pakistan 1965 war, or any of the subsequent war films. Even in a war film they would use the terms like Dushman, they would use the term like other, enemy, us par, but they would never name a country. That all changed after border in 1997, when the name of a particular country, in this case Pakistan, was utilized. The censor board allowed it because of the historical nature of the story, but since that time it has become a norm to use a name of a particular country when it comes to associating it with terrorism or villainy, because of the nation under siege mindset, where India is under threat from foreign powers, particularly terrorists being harbored by a particular nation. So all of this changed the narrative structure of nationalism that was portrayed in Indian cinema. So films like Border, Sarfarosh, Mission Kashmir became deeply nationalistic cinema. If you want to look at how the narrative structure has changed, look at Border and Sarfarosh as compared to say 1960 war or 70 war films of Indian cinema. Now let us move on to the economic aspects or the exhibition aspect, which is the single screen and the multiplex theatres. Now single screen theatres have always been part of the norm of since the advent of cinema, from Lumiere brothers when they showcased their films in a sort of a single screen theatre, and over the decades it has always been a norm. But after liberalization, foreign investment came in the form of multiplexes. Now what are multiplexes? Multiplexes are a single complex or housing building having multiple screens. Now what does this do is, a single complex can have multiple screens, so it can show multiple films or same films multiple shows. A single screen theatre can show maximum a single film 4 times a day. Now with the advent of multiplex, you can have like 4 or 5 screens, and each of them can show simultaneously at least 4 or 5 films, and with that came, or you can have a single film or 2 films and have 3 or 4 shows which are almost running concurrently. So you can have at least 10 to 15 or even 20 shows in any particular given day in comparison to single screen cinema. Now what this did was, it basically uprooted the economic aspect of a single screen cinema. So economically, single screen theatres became a loser's choice and multiplexes became better business sense for theatre owners. And then there were laws, particular laws that were created, like in UP for 10-15 years ago, a single plex could not convert into a multiplex. It was barred by law. Only a entirely new multiplex could come up, and single plex could not convert to the multiplex culture. So all of that decreased the amount of single screen theatres throughout the country. It also changed the way the film structure behaved, not just the exhibition structure, the film structure. Now after the advent of multiplex, remember I told you, because in the 1990s the average film disappeared. There was no longer an average film, either it was an A grade, top A plus grade film, or that means a big budget film, or a B grade or a C grade film which would run in smaller theatres and circuits. But with the advent of multiplex, a theatre owner can have an A plus film running, and to fill up the gaps of their shows and to make the screenings keep on happening, they would require a smaller budget films which they don't have to invest too much money in. So smaller films like Khosla Ka Ghosla, Well Done Abba, they became a sort of a stopgap arrangement. And also because of liberalization, the Muhurat system, or basically releasing a film on a particular day, auspicious date, became a past legacy. Now the films became more globalized in global tradition. Now they release every weekend, that is on a Friday. Every Friday a new set of films or film comes out. And because of multiplex, generally what used to happen is, if it was a single screen, every producer knew that if that film is releasing, all the theatres will take up that film because it's a big budget film with a big, say, movie star, say Amitabh Bachchan film, so everyone will know that all the theatres will like to buy a Amitabh Bachchan film, so they would hold back their releases. But now, because of multiplex, even if there is a Amitabh Bachchan or Amir Khan or Salman Khan, Shah Rukh Khan film being released, simultaneously a smaller budget films can also be released, because the multiplex have the capacity to showcase that also simultaneously. So because of that, the average film has made a comeback with a variety to give audience a different variety, and they have been pretty successful. So this is known as a multiplex cinema process. So in summary, today we talked about the impact of liberalization on film production in India particularly, and the narrative changes that were the consequence of that liberalization and globalization of Indian cinema. Also, we talked about the fall of singleplex and the rise of multiplex and how it impacted the production and exhibition of film. In the next lesson, we will talk about the evolution of censorship and its reception by the film industry, and also the changes or the consequent changes in filmmaking because as a film narrative device because of censorship. Thank you.